20 miles out from the Marloes Peninsula, well beyond the shelter of Ramsey Island and the bird-loud skerries of Grassholm, lies a sprinkling of reef and rock called the Smalls. The sea here is all muscle. Atlantic swell meets the complicated hydraulics of St. George's Channel. Storms press in from the west with the force of a freight train. Mariners once dreaded this patch with good reason. The reef sat squarely across busy coastal and trans-channel routes, and the sea at the Smalls denies you everything but honest hull and sound seamanship. Today, a tall, pale stone tower stands there, helideck perched like a steel halo above its lantern. That is Smalls Lighthouse, the most remote lighthouse operated by Trinity House. Its present form dates to 1861, the tower rising 41 metres above the rock. Its light 36 metres above mean high water, flashing 3 times every 15 seconds, visible for roughly 18 nautical miles on a clear night. It has been automated since 1987, the lamp now tended by technology and periodic human visits rather than resident keepers. But the present tower is only the latest incarnation of an idea that began almost a century earlier, when a Liverpool merchant put money behind a piano maker's improbable design. The first Smalls lighthouse rose not from granite blocks, but from oak. In 1775 to 76, at the urging and investment of John Phillips, a shipowner from Liverpool, a musical instrument maker named Henry Whiteside designed a light that would stand on 9 timber pillars, originally planned in iron but abandoned for English oak as being more elastic and trustworthy, around a central post. The house sat like a wooden crown above the water so that waves could pass beneath. It looked, to some observers, like a stiff-legged octopus, strange and skeletal, but conceptually brilliant for a low, wave-washed reef. Whiteside mocked up the structure at Solva, a small harbour up the coast, during the winter of 1775 to 76, before the pieces were ferried out and raised on the Smalls. The finished light used 8 oil lamps with faceted glass reflectors, later doubled and improved to silvered parabolic reflectors in 1817, a small technological leap that measurably brightened the beam. Over time, as storms taught their lessons, bracing struts multiplied beyond the original 9, and the design's core principle, let the sea pass through rather than fight it, proved influential well beyond Wales. The sea soon tested both structure and men. In 1777, Whiteside visited the station and was stormbound for a month. Food and fuel were dwindling. Hope thinned. He penned a plea for help to a friend at St. David's, sealed it in a bottle inside a small wooden casket with instructions to any finder, and committed it to the water. 2 days later, in a stroke of maritime serendipity, the casket washed ashore almost at the addressee's door, and relief boats were sent. The incident lives on as one of the world's most effective messages in a bottle, a neat parable about the sea's strange loyalties. The wooden lighthouse, often creaking, often rocked by waves, proved more durable than skeptics guessed. It stood for roughly 80 years, a triumph of improvisation and maintenance as much as design. But life upon it was hard, and at times unimaginably grim. The year was 1801, and the Smalls Lighthouse was already a lonely posting. 2 men, Thomas Howell, a cooper from Milford, and Thomas Griffith, or Griffiths, a local man from Pembrokeshire, were assigned as keepers. In those days, only 2 men at a time were sent to the lighthouse, their shifts running for weeks or months, depending on the weather and the availability of relief boats. To accept the post meant long silence, cramped quarters, and the sea's relentless presence. From the start, Howell and Griffith did not get on. Some accounts suggest they quarrelled constantly, their personalities too different to share such close confinement. Others suggest that the isolation itself sharpened tensions that might otherwise have passed unnoticed on land. Whatever the truth, by the time tragedy struck, theirs was already a strained companionship. Sometime during their watch in 1801, Griffith became seriously ill. Illness at sea was no rarity. Poor diet, damp conditions, or an infection could easily overwhelm men with no doctor closer than the Welsh mainland, 20 miles away. In some retellings, Griffith's death came suddenly. In others, he succumbed slowly, raving with fever in the narrow bunks. Either way, he eventually died, leaving Howell the sole living soul upon the Smalls. Howell was trapped. If he cast the body into the sea, as was sometimes done with sailors who died aboard ship, he feared the townsfolk would accuse him of murder. After all, everyone knew they had quarrelled. If he kept the corpse inside the cramped wooden quarters, he would be forced to endure the stench and corruption of decay. Alone, grieving, and fearing for his reputation, Howell made a terrible choice. He built a makeshift coffin from spare planks and lashed it to the outside of the gallery, high enough above the waves to keep it secure. In his mind, this decision both honoured his dead companion and preserved evidence that Howell himself had done no harm. The sea, however, had its own plans. A fierce Atlantic gale descended on the Smalls. Spray shattered across the gallery, waves battering the wooden legs of the lighthouse until the structure shuddered. The coffin was torn open, its boards splintered. To Howell's horror, Griffith's body was exposed, one arm breaking free from its wrappings. The storm winds caught the dead man's limb, swinging it like a signal. Through the tower's small windows, Howell could see it rising and falling. By night, when the lantern threw its steady glow across the sea, the pale arm seemed to beckon him with grotesque familiarity. For weeks, Howell was left utterly alone, his only companion a corpse that seemed to wave to him through the darkness. He tended the light single-handedly, trimming the wicks, polishing the reflectors, keeping the lamps alive against storm and night. Each time he went to win the machinery or fetch supplies, he could hear the knock and rattle of the coffin boards against the gallery rails. Food dwindled. Sleep grew thin. Every time Howell closed his eyes, he swore he could hear Griffith's fist hammering on the wooden walls, demanding entry. Fearful of losing his sanity, Howell poured himself into the rhythm of lighthouse duty, light-tended, log-kept, oil-measured. But in the silences, the phantom gestures of the corpse returned. When at last the relief boat arrived, the men who came ashore barely recognized Howell. His beard had grown wild, his face had aged years in a matter of weeks. His eyes were hollow, haunted. They said he staggered as though the very floor still pitched beneath him, and that he spoke in a low mutter, as though unwilling to raise his voice. Griffith's remains were finally taken down, but the damage was done. Howell's ordeal had become legend before he ever set foot on land. News of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy spread quickly along the Welsh coast and across Britain. The ghastly image of the beckoning corpse caught the public imagination and was repeated in harbourside taverns, chapels, and eventually in newspapers. For Trinity House and other lighthouse authorities, the story carried a sobering lesson. Never again should two men be left in such isolation. From then on, 3 keepers were stationed at remote lighthouses, ensuring that no one would face loneliness and death in quite the same way again. The tale, however, did not end with policy. Even after Howell's departure, later keepers whispered of strange occurrences, unexplained tapping noises on calm nights, the sense of a figure standing just beyond the lamplight on the gallery, and, most unsettling of all, the impression, seen from the mainland cliffs through a spyglass, that a shadowy arm sometimes moved against the tower rail when no man was stationed there. By 1831, the wooden lighthouse of Henry Whiteside had been standing on the Smalls for more than 50 years. Its spindly 9-oak legs, lashed together with iron braces and constantly patched after storms, had endured long beyond what anyone thought possible. Mariners had grown used to its strange silhouette, a crown of timbers on the horizon, lantern shining like a ship's stern light above the sea. Inside, however, the keepers lived in constant tension. They knew the tower swayed in heavy weather. They knew the sea had clawed at the legs before. They knew that at any moment the ocean could remind them just how precarious their perch truly was. In the winter of 1831, a violent Atlantic storm descended. The wind came shrieking out of the west, carrying with it waves the size of houses. The keepers had shuttered the windows, secured their gear, and lit the lamps in readiness. The tower rocked under each blow, groaning as if it were alive. Then came the wave. Unlike the usual rhythm of crash and lull, this one rose out of the storm like a mountain. It struck the Smalls with such force that water shot upward through the open understructure, exploding against the wooden flooring of the keeper's room. With a sound like cannon fire, the floorboards tore free from their fixings and slammed upward, smashing against the ceiling. 3 men were inside. The flying boards and violent surge of seawater struck them all. One keeper was hurled against the wall so violently that he was knocked senseless, his body broken. He would later die of his injuries. The others were battered and bloodied, but alive. The lantern shook above them, miraculously still burning. Imagine it, a room torn apart, seawater running ankle deep across the wreckage, a wounded comrade gasping in pain, and the endless howl of the gale outside. The men who survived had to improvise, repairing what they could, tending the light and nursing the injured man through the storm's long hours. There was no question of evacuation. The seas made landing impossible. They later wrote of hearing the tower groan and whine as though the entire wooden frame might give way. Each new wave felt like a final blow. When relief crews finally arrived, they found the keepers shaken and exhausted, the interior of the lighthouse half ruined. One man was dead, his body laid out in the cramped quarters until it could be taken ashore. The others, pale and limping, bore cuts and bruises as evidence of what they had endured. News of the disaster spread along the Welsh coast. The Smalls had long been a place of grim stories, the tragedy of 1801 still fresh in memory. But now it was clear the wooden structure itself was dangerous. A lighthouse that could have its very floor torn away by the sea was no place for human habitation. Though the wooden tower was patched and continued in use for another 3 decades, the 1831 storm marked a turning point. Trinity House engineers knew that the Smalls would eventually need a stone tower, one that could resist waves by mass and solidity rather than by flexibility and luck. The story of the wave also hardened the mythic aura of the Smalls. To the local sailors, it was not just another lighthouse. It was a living thing, a fragile wooden cage set in the teeth of the ocean, where death could come in the shape of a wave. To live on the Smalls was to live inside the weather. In the wooden era, keepers spoke of the tower rocking under heavy sea, the legs humming, the house creaking like a ship. In the stone era, the tower's solidity brought different sensations. The percussion of waves thudding through the granite in winter, the lantern rooms singing with the wind, salt crystals forming everywhere, loneliness like a tide. Supply runs were dicey. You watched the horizon for the tender, ready to lower or raise slings, pass mail, drag crates across wet iron and stone. You tended the lamp and lens with the devotion of ritual, trimming wicks in the oil era, checking pressure and vapors later, cleaning glass, caring for the clockwork, winding mechanisms, minding the fog signal when the harp of the sea turned grey. The work was repetitive and essential. The drama arrived uninvited. Trinity House's eventual shift to 3 keeper crews helped break up the isolation and spread the load of watchkeeping and maintenance. An institutional lesson commonly tied, directly or indirectly, to Smalls's 1801 ordeal. Even in 3-man teams, reliefs could be delayed by weather for a week or more. Then came automation. Hearts left, lights stayed. The tower became an engineered outpost, visited rather than inhabited. its memory of human routine trapped in old logbooks and the indentations of long-vanished boots on worn stone. The wind had dropped to a lull that evening, and the sea stretched dark and calm, broken only by the hiss of foam against the reef. Keeper Howell stood at the lantern, winding the clockwork that turned the reflectors, his hands raw from weeks of solitude. Behind him, the tower groaned with the sea's memory, timbers flexing like old bones. It had been days, weeks perhaps, since Griffith had died. Time no longer behaved properly. Howell had lost the habit of speech. His voice, when it escaped, startled him with its hoarse unfamiliarity. He had done the only thing he thought right, lashed Griffith's coffin outside, secure against the gallery rail, so that no man could say he had hidden or hastened his comrade's death. But the sea has its own appetite. A gale had come screaming from the west and torn the coffin apart, scattering planks into the tide. Only Griffith's body remained, one arm freed from its wrappings, swinging loose. When the lantern room went dark between wick trims, Howell would see it, through the salt-streaked glass of the window below, an arm pale in the moonlight beckoning. With every gust, it rose and fell, a gesture that mocked prayer or summoned him down. Sometimes he swore the arm waved, even when the air was still. Nights grew long. Howell's sleep was broken by a steady knocking on the wooden walls, as though a loose beam or unseen hand rapped in time with the swell. At first, he blamed the timbers shifting. Then, when the calm came and the sound continued, he wondered if the tower itself remembered the coffin hammerings, replaying each strike into the grain of the wood. He pressed his palms against the walls and whispered, "It's just the sea, just the sea." But the sea did not answer. The dead did. One night, lantern trimmed and the oil flame steady, Howell stepped out onto the gallery. The wind cut sharp as knives, the smell of brine thick. He turned to the place where the coffin had been. There was no body, no wood, nothing but spray. Yet he felt the weight of an eye upon him, as though Griffith still clung there unseen, his arm lifting in endless farewell. When relief finally came, the tenderman said Howell's face was a ruin, aged far beyond his years. He muttered about arms that waved when the air was calm, about voices that knocked when no storm stirred the timbers. They carried him ashore, and the lighthouse behind him sank back into the fog, its wooden frame creaking with secrets. In the years that followed, other keepers told quieter tales. On still nights, they swore they heard rappings in the tower with no earthly cause, or glimpsed a figure on the gallery rail when the station was unstaffed. Some laughed it off as weather, others nodded, remembering Howell's haunted eyes. And so the Smalls kept its light. But to those who know its story, the beam carries more than safety across the dark water. It carries a warning. For on that reef, between the tide and the lantern, a dead man's arm still waves, and not always in farewell. On automated towers, silence takes the night watch, but Smalls still speaks, not in knocks or ghostly waves perhaps, but in the quieter language of continuity. Every 15 seconds, 3 flashes thread a path across the dark, just as generations of mariners expected. The lantern glass is modern, the optic efficient. The caretaking now occurs by checklists and telemetry, rather than kerosene and cotton waste. Yet the effect is timeless, a known light at a known place. And those old stories, haunted or otherwise, continue to do useful work. They preserve the human cost of illumination in grim locations. They remind us why policy changed. They detail the tenacity of men like Howell, who kept a lamp going when almost anyone would have given up. Smalls is not a lighthouse you visit casually. You experience it at a distance, from the cliffs near St. David's Head, on a birding boat out of St. Justinian's, or in the mind via photographs and film. The sea keeps its prerogatives, but that distance suits its legend. The Smalls has always been a threshold place, the line where human needs press a little way into the ocean's domain and then stop. The tower is a marker of that boundary. Nothing on the Smalls is ever truly still. Even on calm days, the sea lifts and falls. The lighthouse simply abides.